Well, I never thought I would grow up to be a film composer. I always
Hmm.
knew I'd be a filmmaker of sorts because I was making movies since I was 9 years old, and I had my dad. I saw Star Wars, and I used to watch a tons of Ray Harryhausen films, and
Oh yeah.
of course, King Kong was one of my favorite movies. 1933 Kong. So I was always obsessed with how they did certain things. So I was asking my father about it, and I was explaining to him stop motion, how this all worked. And he goes, "Well, I have an old movie camera. It's 8 millimeter, not even Super 8, it was 8 millimeter." And he goes, "I think that shoots one frame at a time." And he went and pulled it out, and sure enough, it did. So he bought me film, and that's how I started on that whole path.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
I just made tons of movies that way. I made tons of stop motion, and then sort of branched out to making live action ones with my friends. And all through high school, and I went to film school as well, the
Hmm.
School of Visual Arts in New York City, and graduated from there. And it wasn't until after that that I really seriously started thinking about music, because one of the things I sort of grew up loving was finding the right music for the films that I was making.
Sure.
All my stop motion films, I would go through the record collection and find the perfect cues. And it wasn't about like just putting, I had to make it extra difficult because I could have just gotten a piece of music and played it alongside of the movie, but I wanted it to change the way it did when I watched movies in a theater. The music would follow the story and help you tell the story. And that doesn't happen if you just lay a piece of music behind something.
Sure.
So I got very, very particular about lining up, in which in those days was so hard, especially for me. I was living, in New Jersey. I had no access to anyone in the entertainment business. So it was all sort of figuring it out on my own. And I would get tape recorders. And, like if I started at the beginning of a cue and I would turn the tape upside down and then play it against the film to the sync point, then I could put the tape back up, right side up, and I knew exactly how long I had. So it was like this very complicated process of building a soundtrack for a film. And then you'd have to hope they just stay in sync because you're starting each one separately. They weren't in sync, or it was just a projector and a tape recorder. So
It's like Vitaphone, but with a tape recorder.
yes, exactly. When I'm on a dub stage, and I usually like to spend as much time on the dub stage as I can when the film is being finished, and that generally is not a good thing for the sound people. They're generally afraid to have the composer there because
Right.
generally composers' statements are, "Get rid of all those sounds because my music," and I'm
Yeah.
totally the opposite of that. I am like, "Wait, take that cue out. We don't need that cue. The sound effects are doing an amazing job there," and I think that surprises people to some extent, but it's because I just love the process of filmmaking. I'm not just about the one thing, and as you know, filmmaking is probably the greatest group art form known to man. And it is truly a collaboration,
In its
and
best sense, it really is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and everyone should be out for making that thing up on the screen the best it can be. So
Absolutely.
it's for me, it's all fun. It's
Now,
a fun.
now talking about being on the dub stage, which is something that rarely happens. I mean, in a lot of cases, we'll have the music editor on the dub stage, and there will be sort of a clash of
Yeah.
opinions.
Hmm.
But when you prepare, I'm getting a little ahead of us, but you've spurred my brain into the aspects of how we prepare the stuff to get to the dub stage, because most of us are working independently and then we meet there, and usually it's a big cacophony of stuff to sort of level
Yes.
out everything. Sometimes it works really well if there was some pre-planning, but how do you get to I mean, how much stuff is available if you needed to like thin out an orchestration or something like that? How much pre-mixing is done, and are you involved? You're obviously involved in that when it's delivered to the stage.
Right.
Pretty much a lot of those decisions are made already, but if
Yes.
something can come up at the last minute where the
Yeah.
strings are clashing with the alien voice or whatever.
Yeah, no, it definitely can happen. Traditionally, normally, I will record with the whole orchestra in the same room at the same time. I don't do stripes. I don't do any of that. Now, having said that, we just did a project. We just recorded Jurassic World
Yes.
Dominion, and because of COVID, we had to do it remotely, and it was in London. I was here, and we had to have everyone separated
Oh
because they could
wow.
only have X amount of people in the room at the same time, which basically meant we could have our brass section in one room, and we could have our percussion in a different room. Did it at Abbey Road, so they have studios. We took over 2 studios there, and recorded them simultaneously, brass and perc, and then on alternate days we would do winds. So when you go to the dub stage with that material, you have much more flexibility because it's all,
Sure.
But there's this old fashioned part of me that really loves the sound of just a full orchestra together and what that does. And if you're smart about writing, meaning if you pay attention to what the other people's jobs are on the film, and in this case, we're talking about sound people, I try to stay very cognizant of what their job is and what they might be adding to the mix as well. And so if I'm working on a scene, and sometimes it's like, everyone is just balls out, that's the way it is, but I do try to, oh, I know there's a big explosion here or someone saying a line here, so I make sure the orchestration comes down. I make sure that it's orchestrated properly so that they're not going to have to just duck the music down in order to make room for the dialogue. I make sure I'm out before the explosion. So I try very hard to make sure that the music is very much tailored to the sonic palette, so to speak, so that they can just slide it in and hopefully very little has to be done, and that's something, I pay a lot of attention to. I work very hard at making that because I'm a big believer in making the people that come after you on the chain, make it easy for them, as easy as you can anyway, because they already have a hard enough job as it is finishing this stuff, and nowadays with digital editing and the movies change on a dime every day, there is no such thing as a locked picture until it's actually on the screen in front of you in a theater.
Yeah.
And
even after that,
it has changed. So, I have such empathy for, the people down the chain, and hopefully trying to make it easier for them, trying to make it, so that they don't have to like pull their hair out just because I decided to have the whole orchestra playing as loud as possible through the entire scene,
Yeah.
So,
There's the Sony stage. There's Fox, which is a brilliant stage. Aaron
Yeah.
Redding, who's one of the managers there, is a dear friend of mine. There's what else is there? There's Warner Brothers, of course. Yeah, the Eastwood stage.
And Todd AO, actually, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's
Right. Yeah. What
if
if you had to pick, what's your favorite place to record?
I don't have a favorite because I sort of it's more like casting to me.
Sure.
It's about getting, okay, what sound is going to be right for this movie,
Sure.
because each of those stages have very different sounds,
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
I learned that very on listening to like the music from Disney back in the 50s and 60s. That room
Yeah.
was so bright. Stage A there, you can hear the trumpets in like Pirates of
Yep.
the Caribbean and compare them to Jungle Book, and that's the room.
Yeah.
And all of them are like
No,
that in some
you're
way.
right. There's a definite sound to, especially that stage. There was absolutely a definite sound to, with the muted trumpets was a big thing. And if you listen to George Bruns's work too, there's so much. It's so great.
Yeah, let's talk a little. I know you're a Disney squid too.
Well, actually, if you want to talk
about
about that so I did do a short for Disney, a Goofy short, and it was one of those how to. Remember they did a million.
Oh
of those.
yeah.
We did one called How to Hook Up Your Home Theater.
Sure.
And of course, the Disney stage didn't exist anymore, so we did this one at Capitol, and I kept searching for the sound that you're talking about, and I could not figure out how to get it right, and we're there all day, and we're mixing all afternoon, and I was sort of had given up because it sounded fine, and Dan was recording it. It sounded great, but it wasn't that sound that I just knew in my head.
Yes.
And so as we were printing the last mix, right, and I was getting ready to leave, and I'm gathering up my stuff, and I'm like, all right, and I sort of had given up, and I was like, meh. And I accidentally hit a button on the console, and it was the mute button for the reverb.
Which
And
was that
muted-
electronic reverb or the echo chamber?
We were using the echo chamber.
Yeah.
So I muted it, and all we had there was no reverb, just the sound of the room itself. And I for like, and it came on for a second or two and then went away. I was like, wait, what just happened? I was like, that's the sound. So and Danny's like, well, you just muted the thing. And I was like, what, mute it again. So I muted it and I was like, that's the sound. It was literally just the sound of the room. And I know it was a different room, but it was the closest I ever heard to it,
Oh,
you know?
wow.
And just that reflectiveness, especially in the muted trumpets. It was like, just that
I
bounce
know
back.
exactly what you're talking about.
So I was like, that's the sound I want right
Yeah.
there. So I made him go all back and we had to reprint all the mixes just like that.
But they
Like,
did. They did it, huh?
yeah. Oh yeah, they
Oh,
did.
that's great.
But if I hadn't stupidly sat on the board and muted that thing, then I
Oh my
never would have
God.
figured that out.
That's
So,
great.